I never thought that at 73 I would have to start my life over again. Juneau is a small town on the edge of Alaska, where everyone knows each other and there are almost no secrets. I have lived here for most of my adult life, married Noel Kingsley here, and gave birth to and raised our son Bradley here. The window of my small extension overlooks the bay. Noel and I used to love sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the setting sun paint the water scarlet. Now Heather, my son's wife, sits on that porch, staring impassively at the same sunset, unable to see its beauty. This morning I made myself a cup of tea, a small ritual left over from the days when Noel and I would come home from the gallery and discuss the day. Our art gallery was the only one in all of Juneau, and we were proud to bring in works not only by local artists, but also by recognized masters from the mainland. We managed to create a small cultural oasis amid the harsh northern wilderness. Noel died 6 years ago. A heart attack took him suddenly, right in the middle of an exhibition of young Alaskan artists. He literally fell into the arms of Eli Patterson, whose painting of mountain ranges he had just been emotionally praising. The doctor said that Noel died happy, doing what he loved. It's a small consolation, but it's all I have left. After his death, I continued to run the gallery for a while, but my heart was no longer in it. In the end, I sold the business to a young couple of enthusiasts from Seattle. I put the money aside, and my main source of income became my pension and the small interest from investments that Noel and I had made in better times. I ran my hand over the wooden tabletop. Noel had made this table with his own hands. He always loved working with wood. It was his hobby after long days spent among paintings and sculptures. Our extension was his workshop. Now it's my home. Small but cozy, with all the things dear to my heart that I was able to take from the main building. Bradley was a good son. At least I thought so until Heather came into his life. He followed in the footsteps of his grandfather, my father, and became a veterinarian. It's a respected profession in Juneau. Many people here keep dogs, especially sled dogs, even if they no longer use them for their intended purpose. My father used to treat dogs that went on real expeditions. Bradley mainly deals with pets, but he is no less respected. 3 years ago, Bradley called me and said he needed to have a serious talk. He came alone without Heather, which was unusual. Over a cup of tea, he told me that their clinic was on the verge of bankruptcy. A new veterinary center that opened on the other side of town had lured away many of their clients. Bradley and Heather had taken out a loan to buy a house a year ago, and now they were in a difficult situation. Mom, Heather and I were thinking, maybe we could stay with you for a while until we get back on our feet? His voice sounded uncertain, and he didn't look me in the eye. I didn't hesitate for a second. Of course, my son and his wife could live with me. The house is big, there's enough room for everyone. But when I mentioned it to Bradley, he blushed and started mumbling something about personal space and independence. Heather thinks it will be difficult for us to live together, he finally blurted out. You know she's used to a certain lifestyle. I knew. Heather worked as a lawyer at one of the few law firms in Juneau. She always dressed as if she were about to appear before the Supreme Court. High heels, strict suits, perfect makeup. She looked at me as if I were a museum exhibit, with polite interest but without a hint of warmth. What do you suggest, dear? I asked then. We thought, maybe you could move into your father's studio. We would renovate it and make it comfortable. Heather and I would live in the main house, temporarily, of course. That temporarily stretched into 3 years. I moved into the annex, which Bradley had indeed fixed up. It had a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. Everything a single older woman needed. At least that's what Heather thought. The first few months went relatively smoothly. We had dinner together 2 or 3 times a week. Bradley often came to see me in the evenings and talked about his patients. Heather was polite, though she kept her distance. Gradually, things began to change. Our dinners together became less frequent and then stopped altogether. Bradley visited less and less, and when he did come, he was constantly looking at his watch. Heather, on the other hand, limited herself to a dry nod and a couple of meaningless phrases when we met. One day, I went into the main house unannounced. I wanted to borrow some sugar, which I didn't have enough of for baking. I heard voices coming from the kitchen and froze. She came into the house again when we weren't there. Heather's voice sounded irritated. She rearranged my kitchen towels. Mom just wanted to help, Bradley replied wearily. That's not help, that's invasion. We need to set boundaries, Brad. This house is our space, and I want to feel like I'm the host here, not a guest in your mother's house. I left quietly, forgetting about the sugar. That evening, I sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the bay and thinking about how strange everything had turned out. The house that Noel and I had built with so much love, where every detail held our shared memories, had now become a territory to which I had no access. A week later, Bradley came to me with a guilty look on his face and a set of keys. Mom, Heather and I thought it would be better if you call before coming to the house. You see, Heather has important clients, and she needs to know in advance if someone is coming. He handed me the keys, new ones, different from the ones I had before. We changed the locks, just for security reasons, he added, not looking me in the eye. I took the keys silently. What could I say? It wasn't just a change of locks, it was a message. I was being deprived of the right to freely enter my own home. Yes, my own. That was the irony. Legally, the house still belonged to me. When Bradley and Heather moved in, we didn't sign any paperwork transferring ownership. I just let them live there because they needed help. Because Bradley was my son, and I wanted only the best for him. At the time, I didn't think about how I could use that fact to my advantage. I still hoped that Heather would soften over time, that we would find common ground. But with each passing day, it became more and more obvious that this wasn't going to happen. I felt this particularly keenly on Bradley's birthday. I baked his favorite blueberry pie, a recipe that had been passed down in our family for generations. I came to the main house, calling ahead as required by the new rules. Heather opened the door and gave me a cold look, lingering on the pie in my hands. Bradley's not home, she said. He has an urgent call. On his birthday? I couldn't hide my surprise. Work is work, Heather shrugged. You can leave. This? She nodded at the pie. I'll give it to him when he gets back. I handed her the cake, and at that moment, Bradley's laughter came from inside the house. Heather quickly closed the door, but I managed to see the festive table and balloons behind her. Back in the annex, I sat motionless for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. My son was celebrating his birthday and hadn't invited me. What's more, his wife had lied to my face without the slightest embarrassment. That evening, I realized that Heather wasn't just keeping her distance. She was methodically pushing me out of Bradley's life, and the worst part was that he was letting her do it. I took an old photo album out of the closet. Here is Bradley at the age of 5, holding his first fishing rod. Here he is at 10, proudly showing off a science project that won first place at the school fair. Here we are with Noel and 17-year-old Bradley before he left for college. In all the photos, he's smiling that open, sincere smile that I hardly ever see anymore. The next morning, I called my old friend, Martha Quinlan. We met in school and have supported each other through all of life's trials ever since. Martha was widowed 5 years before me and now lived with her daughter Celeste, who, unlike Heather, treated her mother with love and respect. They're using you, Ellie, Martha said after I told her everything. You gave them a roof over their heads, and they're pushing you out of your own life. He's my son, Martha, I sighed. What can I do? You can remind them that the house belongs to you, Martha said firmly, and that you can ask them to move out at any time. I shook my head. The thought of kicking my own son out seemed unbearable to me. Despite everything that had happened, I continued to hope that the situation would somehow resolve itself. That Bradley would come to his senses, that Heather would soften. But every day brought new little humiliations. Heather forgot to give me an invitation to a city event where Bradley was receiving an award for his work with children with autism. Then I overheard her complaining to a friend on the phone about the old lady who doesn't want to retire. Then Bradley canceled our rare meetings, citing work or fatigue. The addition, which at first seemed cozy, now felt more and more like a cage. I felt like an uninvited guest on property that legally belonged to me. But I kept quiet, endured, and hoped for the best. I didn't know yet that my patience would soon come to an end. With the onset of autumn, Juneau is hit by prolonged rains and piercing winds from the bay. I had always loved this time of year. Cozy evenings with a book by the fireplace, the smell of baked apples and cinnamon filling the house. But now, in my little annex, autumn seemed just cold and dreary. The fireplace was in the main house, as was the large kitchen with the oven where I baked my signature apple pies. The annex only had a small electric stove, which was difficult to use for anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. On one of those chilly evenings, I gathered my courage and called Bradley. "Can I use your oven? I want to bake an apple pie for the book club meeting." The book club was the only place where I still felt needed and respected. Every 2 weeks, 6 women my age would get together to discuss a book we had read. This time, the meeting was supposed to be at my place, and I wanted to treat my friends to something homemade. "Sure, Mom," Bradley replied after a short pause. "Just, let's do it tomorrow, okay? Heather has an important video conference with clients from Anchorage today." I agreed, although I didn't understand how quietly staying in the kitchen could interfere with a video conference, which I assumed was taking place in the living room or study. The next day, at exactly 10 in the morning, I headed to the main house with a basket of apples. Heather opened the door. She was wearing a strict gray suit and her hair was perfectly styled, even though the workday had long since begun. "Oh, Eleanor," she said my name as if it were the name of an exotic disease. "Bradley said you'd be coming to bake." "Yes, for the book club." I tried to smile. "I won't get in your way, I promise." Heather stepped aside, letting me into the house. I walked into the kitchen and froze in bewilderment. Everything in my kitchen was different. Instead of a cozy wooden table, there was a glass structure that looked more like a laboratory stand. The old cabinets had been replaced with glossy facades without handles. The stove I had cooked on for 30 years was gone, replaced by some kind of futuristic panel with touch buttons. "Do you like it?" Heather noticed my confusion. Bradley and I decided to update the interior a bit. The country style was so outdated. Country style. That's what she called the furniture that Noel and I had chosen with such love. Each piece had its own story. The table was made by a local craftsman who used wood from his own property, and we found the cabinets at an antique sale in Seattle. Very modern, was all I could say. "Where's the oven now?" Heather pointed to a panel in the wall. "It's a combination steamer and oven. Much more efficient and healthier than that ancient contraption that used to be here. I'll show you how to use it." For the next 10 minutes, Heather explained how the new appliance worked, as if I were a child or a particularly slow-witted foreigner. I listened attentively, but with every passing minute, I felt more and more out of place in my own home. "Where are my baking pans?" I asked when the explanation was over. "Oh, those old aluminum pans, I threw them away." "Aluminum is full of toxins, Eleanor. We use silicone pans now. They're in the bottom drawer." I silently took out the bright rubber molds, which were nothing like the ones I had been baking with my whole life. But I didn't argue. I just got to work, trying not to pay attention to Heather, who was still standing there watching me with an expression of condescending superiority. "You know, Eleanor, you could just buy a pie at the bakery on Main Street. They make excellent pastries and you wouldn't have to bother." "I like to bake," I replied, cutting apples. "It helps me feel needed." The last word slipped out involuntarily. Heather snorted. "At your age, the main thing is peace and rest, not fussing over the stove, at my age." As if being 73 were some kind of crime or incurable disease. As if, upon reaching a certain age, a person automatically becomes a helpless creature, incapable of even baking a pie. "I'm still quite capable," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "And if you don't mind, I'd like to finish baking before my friends arrive." Heather shrugged and left the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts and unfamiliar appliances. I managed, though with difficulty. The pie wasn't as perfect as usual, but it was still good enough. As I took it out of the oven, Bradley walked into the kitchen. He looked tired. The last few months of working at the veterinary clinic had taken all his strength. Competition with the new center was getting tougher. "Mom, can I talk to you?" He sat down at the glass table that I still couldn't call my own. "Of course, dear." I put the pie out to cool and sat down opposite my son. "Heather said you were upset about the kitchen renovation," he began, not looking me in the eye. "I was surprised," I corrected him. "These are pretty serious changes, and it would be nice to know about them in advance." Bradley sighed. "Mom, we wanted to surprise you. Heather thinks a more modern kitchen would be more convenient. More convenient for whom, Bradley? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. I cooked on that stove for 30 years. I knew every feature, every nuance, and now I feel like a stranger in my own kitchen. Technically, Bradley hesitated. Technically, Mom, it's our kitchen now. Heather and I have been living here for 3 years, and we want the house to match our idea of comfort. Technically, I emphasized the word. The house still belongs to me, Bradley. We didn't sign any documents transferring ownership. My son's face took on an expression I couldn't quite define, a mixture of guilt, irritation, and some kind of hidden resentment. We thought it was an agreement, he said finally, that the house is ours now, and you live in the annex. We never discussed anything like that, I shook my head. I allowed you to live here because you needed help, but I didn't give up my house. Bradley stood up abruptly. If I had known you were going to hold this over our heads like the sword of Damocles, I would never have agreed to your proposal. We could have managed on our own. Bradley, wait. But he had already left the kitchen, leaving me alone with a cooling pie and a heavy feeling in my chest. I wasn't going to use the house as leverage. I just wanted my feelings and opinions to mean something in this situation. That evening, the book club met. Martha and the other women gathered in my small living room. We discussed Donna Tartt's novel, but I couldn't concentrate on the conversation. My thoughts kept returning to my morning conversation with Bradley. Ellie, are you with us? Martha touched my arm lightly. Sorry, I smiled awkwardly. It's just been a tough day. After the guests left, Martha stayed behind to help me clear the cups and plates. When we were done, she sat down across from me and looked intently into my eyes. Tell me what happened. And I told her about the new kitchen, about Bradley's reaction, about how I feel more and more like a stranger in my own home. Martha listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. They're taking advantage of your kindness, Ellie, she said when I finished. And they'll continue to do so as long as you let them. What do you suggest? Kick my own son out of the house? I suggest talking to him like an adult to an adult. Remind him that this is your home and you have a say in what happens in it. I nodded, but deep down I knew that such a conversation was unlikely to change anything. Bradley had already chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. The following weeks brought new little conflicts. Heather accidentally threw away a box of my old photos that I had left in the storage room of the main house. Bradley refused to help me repair the leaky roof on the annex, citing his busy schedule. When I found a contractor on my own, Heather complained about the constant noise, even though the work was done during the day and took only 2 days. But the real explosion came when I tried to plant some new jasmine bushes near the annex. What are you doing? Heather came out onto the porch of the main house just as I started digging the holes. Planting jasmine, I replied. It smells so wonderful in the summer. But it ruins the overall look of the property, Heather objected. Bradley and I are planning a minimalist, Scandinavian-style landscape here. It's just a few bushes next to my addition, I continued digging. They won't bother anyone. Heather moved closer, her heels sinking deep into the soft, rain-soaked ground. Eleanor, we've already discussed this. The house and the property are our space. We allow you to live in the extension, but that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want here. Allow? I straightened up, leaning on my shovel. You allow me to live in the extension of the house that belongs to me? Belonged, Heather cut in. It was an unspoken agreement. You gave us the house, and we provided you with a place to live in your old age. I didn't give anything to anyone. My voice remained calm, even though I was boiling inside. There are no documents confirming the change of ownership. Oh, is that how you want to play it? Heather crossed her arms over her chest. Perhaps we should remind ourselves who the lawyer is here. I can prove in court that there was a verbal agreement. We have witnesses that you voluntarily transferred the house to us. What witnesses? I was genuinely surprised. Your friends from the book club who came to our housewarming party 3 years ago. They all heard you say that the house was now ours. I remembered that evening. Yes, I did say something like that, but it was just an expression of hospitality, not a legally significant statement. I think we should discuss this with Bradley, I said, trying to sound calm. Discuss what? As if on cue, my son appeared on the porch. He had just returned from work and looked tired and irritated. Your mother thinks she can dispose of our property because the house is still formally registered in her name. Heather approached her husband and put her hand on his shoulder. Bradley looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Mom, we've already talked about this. I thought we had decided everything. We haven't decided anything. I shook my head. You just assumed that the house is now yours, and I should be grateful that I'm allowed to live in the annex. But that's not the case, Bradley. My son sighed and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had picked up from his father. What do you want, Mom? For us to move out? Where? You know we don't have the money for that. I'm not asking you to move out, I said. I just want to be treated with respect. I want my opinion to matter. I want to be able to plant a few jasmine bushes near where I live. It looks tacky, Heather interjected. Jasmine doesn't fit in with the overall concept at all. I looked at her, feeling something like anger growing inside me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. Concept? This isn't a photo shoot for a magazine, Heather. This is the house where I've lived most of my life. The house that Noel and I built, cared for, and filled with memories. And now I can't even plant flowers without your approval? Enough. Bradley raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Let's all calm down. Mom, if it's so important to you to plant that jasmine, go ahead. Heather, please, let's not make a big deal out of this. Heather turned to her husband with an expression of extreme indignation. You're letting her do this? Ruin all our landscaping plans? It's just a few bushes, Bradley said wearily. They won't ruin the overall look. Heather turned and strode quickly into the house. Bradley gave me an apologetic look and followed her. I stood there with the shovel in my hands, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and bitterness. A small victory in a battle that was becoming increasingly exhausting. That evening, after planting the jasmine, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked at the lit windows of the main house. Bradley and Heather's voices came from the open kitchen window. They were arguing, and although I couldn't make out the words, the tone was eloquent enough. I caught myself thinking that I no longer felt the same guilt for being the cause of their quarrel. Something in me had changed. Perhaps it was fatigue from the constant small humiliations. Perhaps the pride I had suppressed for so long in order to maintain the appearance of family well-being had finally awakened. At that moment, I began to understand that my kindness was indeed perceived by them as weakness, that by allowing Bradley and Heather to take advantage of my hospitality and patience for so long, I had unwittingly encouraged their behavior, that perhaps it was time to change the rules of the game. But I didn't yet know how to do that without completely destroying my relationship with my son. And I had no idea that the answer would come very soon, on my 70th birthday. 70 is a strange age. It's not as round as 60, nor as significant as 80. I hadn't planned on celebrating it in any special way and was surprised when Martha called a week before my birthday with a determined tone. We're throwing a party, she announced in a tone that brooked no argument. Martha, at my age, it's not the time for parties, I tried to joke. Nonsense. 70 is the new 50. And besides, after everything you've been through in recent years, you deserve a celebration. We'll meet at your place on Saturday at 6 in the evening. Everything has already been decided. By everything, Martha meant the women from our book club who had obviously conspired behind my back. I tried to object, saying that my extension was too small to accommodate guests and that Bradley and Heather might object, but Martha just laughed. Oh dear, we're not going to celebrate in your little doghouse. We rented a small hall at the Northern Lights. Remember that cafe on the shore where Celeste got engaged? They make a great dinner and provide everything you need. I was deeply touched. My friends had not only decided to throw me a party, but they had taken care of all the details. Did you invite Bradley and Heather? I asked after a pause. There was silence on the line. Actually, I thought you would invite them yourself, Martha finally replied. He is your son after all, and his wife, I finished for her. Yes, of course, I'll tell them. I spoke to Bradley that evening. He came by to check on the new heater that he and Heather had recently installed in the addition. I seized the moment and told him about the birthday plans. Saturday? Bradley frowned. Mom, we had plans for that evening. We were going to Heather's company party. Oh, I tried to hide my disappointment. Of course I understand. Work is more important. Bradley looked at me intently and sighed. I'll talk to Heather. Maybe we can stop by for a little while, at least to wish you a happy birthday. You don't have to change your plans because of me, I smiled tensely. My friends will be there, I won't be alone. I'll talk to her anyway, Bradley said stubbornly. It's not every day your mother turns 70. I didn't have high hopes for this conversation. Heather was always good at manipulating Bradley, and if she decided that a corporate party was more important than her mother-in-law's birthday, then so be it. However, to my surprise, on Saturday, just as I was about to leave, there was a knock at the door. Bradley was standing on the doorstep in a suit. Next to him was Heather in an elegant black dress. We decided to stop by your party before the corporate party, my son explained, to congratulate you and give you a gift. Heather smiled, but her eyes remained cold. She was holding a small box wrapped in silver paper. Happy birthday, Eleanor, she said, handing me the box. I hope you like it. Inside was a silk scarf in pastel colors. Beautiful, expensive, and completely not my style. I had always preferred bright colors and unusual patterns. But I sincerely thanked her for the gift, realizing that Heather probably hadn't even thought about my preferences. Will you come with us? Bradley asked. We can give you a ride to the cafe. I agreed, and soon we were in the car, heading for the Northern Lights. Heather was on the phone the whole way, discussing some business with a colleague. Bradley drove intently, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror. How are things at the clinic? I asked when Heather finally finished her call. Slowly getting better, Bradley replied. Tom and I have decided to specialize in exotic animals. In Juneau, many people now keep not only dogs and cats, but also iguanas, snakes, and even mini pigs. And the new veterinary center doesn't have any specialists for such pets. Smart, I smiled. I always knew you had an entrepreneurial streak. It was my idea, Heather interjected. I did the marketing research and identified this niche. Brilliant work as always, dear. Bradley took his eyes off the road for a moment to smile at his wife. I remained silent, feeling that strange feeling welling up inside me again, a mixture of resentment and anger that I had been working so hard to suppress over the past few months. The Northern Lights was decorated in my honor. Balloons, flowers, and a banner reading, Happy Birthday, Eleanor, greeted us at the entrance. Almost all the guests had already gathered inside. My friends from the book club, a few old acquaintances from the gallery, even a couple of former clients with whom I had remained friends. Martha came up to me first and hugged me. Happy birthday, Ellie, she turned to Bradley and Heather. I'm glad you could make it. This is so important to Eleanor. We won't be long, Heather warned immediately. We have another event tonight. Of course, Martha smiled, but I knew that look. She mentally added another minus to her internal list for Heather. The evening began with an aperitif, a glass of champagne for each guest and light snacks. Bradley stayed close to me, introducing me to people he didn't know. Heather immediately went to the bar, where she spent most of her time buried in her phone. Dinner was wonderful. Salmon baked with herbs, mashed potatoes with truffle oil, fresh vegetables. All my favorite dishes. Martha really went out of her way to make this evening special. After dessert, a blueberry cake, the recipe for which Martha had begged me for a year ago. The toasts began. One after another, my friends stood up, raised their glasses, and said such warm words about me that I couldn't hold back my tears. Celeste, Martha's daughter, recalled how I taught her to draw when she was little. Eleanor never said, no, that won't work. She always found a way to turn a blotch into a butterfly or a stain into a cloud. That ability to see possibilities where others see problems has always inspired me. Rose, the oldest of us, talked about how I supported her after her husband's death. Eleanor came every day just to sit with me. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we were silent, but she was always there, and that gave me the strength to go on living. I glanced at Bradley. He was listening intently, and a thoughtfulness appeared on his face that I hadn't seen in a very long time. When it was Heather's turn, she reluctantly stood up, holding a glass of wine in her hand. I haven't known Eleanor as long as all of you, she began, glancing around the table. But I've already come to appreciate her uniqueness. She paused as if searching for the right words. Eleanor belongs to a generation that grew up in very different circumstances. Sometimes that creates certain difficulties in communication. She smiled tensely. but I appreciate her life experience and the fact that she raised such a wonderful son as Bradley. It was perhaps the driest and most formal toast of the evening. I saw Martha press her lips together and Rose frown, but I just nodded and raised my glass. Thank you, Heather, I said. I also appreciate your caring for Bradley. After dessert, coffee was served, and the guests began to move from the table to a small dance floor where live music was playing, a jazz quartet performing tunes from my youth. I was dancing with Edward, Rose's husband, when I heard Heather laugh. She was standing at the bar with a martini glass, talking to one of Celeste's younger friends. No, you have no idea. Heather's voice was louder than usual. Apparently, the alcohol was already having an effect. She still types on that ancient typewriter. She says computers are too complicated. At 70 years old, refusing to learn new things is so typical of her generation. The girl replied quietly, clearly embarrassed. Oh, and that's not all, Heather continued. She keeps herbs in old tin cans and labels them with her scribbles. Once I found a can labeled sage, and inside there was some kind of mold. It's just unsanitary. I froze in my tracks. Edward sensed my tension and stopped. Eleanor, are you okay? Yes, I just need to sit down, I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. We returned to the table and I took a sip of water, trying to calm down. That wasn't true. I do store herbs in old tin cans, the kind that used to be sold with tea or cookies, but I always make sure they are clean and fresh. The sage Heather was talking about was perfectly normal, just dried out and slightly darkened by time. Bradley approached our table, smiling. Mom, shall we dance? They're playing your favorite song. Sure enough, the quartet began playing Moon River, a melody that Noel and I considered ours. I nodded and stood up, but just then Heather approached us. Bradley, we have to go, she said, holding her purse and coat. We're late for the company party. Just one more dance, Bradley asked. Only 5 minutes. Heather pursed her lips. We're already late. Eric wrote that everyone is gathered and waiting for us. Bradley looked disappointed but nodded. Okay, let's go. Sorry, Mom, he turned to me. But we'll see each other over the weekend, I promise. Of course, dear, I smiled, trying not to show my disappointment. Thanks for coming. Heather was already heading for the exit. Bradley quickly hugged me and hurried after her. The evening continued, and gradually I began to enjoy the party again. Martha and I danced, laughed, and reminisced about our youth. There was a cake with candles, which I blew out to the applause of the guests. There were gifts, books, scarves, a bottle of good wine. It was already around 11 when the guests began to leave. Martha offered to drive me home, and I gratefully accepted. On the way, we discussed the evening, and I couldn't resist commenting on Heather. Did you hear what she said about me? About herbs and a typewriter? Martha pursed her lips. I did, and that's not all. When you and Edward were dancing, she told Jane that you refused to take your medication and prefer some kind of herbal concoctions. I shook my head. That was a lie, too. I took my blood pressure medication regularly, as prescribed by my doctor. The herbal teas were just a supplement, and my doctor knew about them and didn't mind. Why is she doing this, Martha? Why is she making me out to be some crazy old woman? Because it's easier for her, Martha replied. If you're just a weird old lady, your opinion doesn't matter. You become convenient for her, predictable, a little ridiculous, and completely safe. I thought about her words. Maybe Martha was right. The image of a helpless, backward old woman was convenient for Heather. It justified her dismissive attitude toward me and allowed her to ignore the fact that I was still the rightful owner of the house. When we pulled up to the house, I was surprised to see light in the windows of the annex. I clearly remembered turning everything off before I left. Do you want me to come with you? Martha offered, having also noticed the light. No, it's okay. I shook my head. Bradley probably came in to check something and forgot to turn it off. We said goodbye, and I headed for the annex. Opening the door, I froze on the threshold. Bradley and Heather were in my small living room. She was sitting in my chair, holding some papers, and he was standing by the window with an expression of extreme discomfort on his face. What are you doing here? I asked, taking off my coat. Heather looked up from the papers and smiled. That cold, professional smile I knew so well. Ah, Eleanor, you're back. We were just waiting for you. Shouldn't you be at the company party? We decided that talking to you was more important, Heather replied, tapping her finger on the papers. Especially in light of some discoveries. I looked at Bradley, seeking an explanation. Mom, please sit down, he said, pointing to the sofa. We need to talk. I sat down, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over me. We found the documents for the house, Heather began without preamble. They clearly state that Noel Kingsley is the owner. Yes, I nodded. Noel bought this property before we were married. But after his death, everything was transferred to me in his will. But there are questions about the will, Heather said, placing the papers on the table. We haven't found an officially certified document, only a draft, which has no legal force. I felt my heart begin to beat faster. What are you saying? Of course there was a will. Noel had everything drawn up by his lawyer, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett died 4 years ago, Heather remarked. And there was no copy of Noel's will in his files. I checked. You checked? I couldn't believe my ears. You rummaged through the deceased lawyer's documents? I'm a lawyer, Eleanor. Heather shrugged. I have access to such things. And, as it turned out, the rightful heir to the house was Bradley, as Noel's only son. I looked at my son. Did you know about this? Did you let her dig through the documents behind my back? Bradley looked miserable. Mom, I didn't know Heather was doing this. She only showed me the results today after your party. And decided to ruin my birthday with this news. I smiled bitterly. It has nothing to do with your birthday, Heather snapped. It's just time to dot the I's and cross the T's. The house belongs to Bradley, which means it belongs to me as his wife. And we have every right to set our own rules here. Even if you're right, and I doubt that, I tried to speak calmly. Couldn't you have waited until tomorrow? Why bring this up now on my birthday? Because I'm tired of your constant hints that this is your house. Heather stood up, towering over me. Tired of your complaints, of how you manipulate Bradley by using maternal guilt. It's time to put an end to this. Heather, please! Bradley tried to intervene, but she ignored him. Starting tomorrow, we're setting new rules, Heather continued. No gardening without our permission. No visits to the main house without calling first. And no herb jars in the pantry. They take up space and look awful. Heather! Bradley raised his voice. Enough! No, Brad, it's not enough, she turned to him. We've indulged her for too long. It's time to finally set clear boundaries. She turned back to me, and in her eyes I saw what she had always tried to hide, pure, undiluted animosity. I'm the mistress of this house, and you, old woman, will live by my rules, Heather blurted out, unable to hide the triumph in her voice. The room fell silent. Bradley looked shocked. Heather was breathing heavily, clearly satisfied with her outburst. And I felt something inside me finally break, but not in a bad way, more like the lock on the door behind which I kept my pride and self-respect had broken. I slowly stood up, straightening to my full height. Despite being 70 years old, I was still taller than Heather. The house you live in doesn't belong to my son. It belongs to me, I said in a quiet but firm voice. Get ready to move out. Heather froze, then laughed, a sharp, unpleasant laugh. Didn't you hear what I just said? We have the documents. The house belongs to Bradley. You don't have any documents, I shook my head. You only have your assumptions that the will wasn't properly executed. But I can show you a certified copy that's kept in a safe deposit box at the bank. And I can show you all the property tax receipts for the last 6 years. They're all in my name. I paused, watching the confidence on Heather's face turn to doubt. But even if you were right, and the house really belonged to Bradley, I still wouldn't put up with this treatment. I've turned a blind eye to your neglect, your petty meanness, your attempts to push me out of my son's life for a long time. But today you crossed the line. I turned to Bradley, who stood there as if struck by lightning. And you, my son, allowed this to happen. You stood by and watched as your wife systematically humiliated your mother. And you did nothing to stop it. Mom, I didn't know. I thought you just didn't get along, Bradley muttered. Didn't get along? I smiled bitterly. She deliberately kept me out of your life. She lied to my face. She ridiculed me in front of others. And you didn't notice? Bradley lowered his head, unable to find the words to respond. In any case, I turned back to Heather, my decision is final. I'm selling the house. You have a month to find a new place to live. You can't do that, Heather exclaimed. This is our home. I can and I will, I said, heading for the door. Now please leave. I'm tired and want to rest. Mom, let's talk. Bradley took a step toward me. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully. The time for peaceful resolutions is over, Bradley. I opened the door. I gave you 3 years of my life. 3 years of patience and humiliation. I won't give you another day. Heather grabbed her bag and rushed out of the annex, giving me a look full of hatred. Bradley lingered in the doorway. Mom, please reconsider. Where will we go? The same place you would have gone if I hadn't offered you a place to live here 3 years ago, I replied. You're a grown man, Bradley. Deal with your own problems. Now please leave me alone. He stood there for another second, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, then left, quietly closing the door behind him. I sank into a chair, feeling a strange mixture of emptiness and relief. In one night, I had destroyed what was left of our family relationship. But at the same time, I had finally stood up for myself. And it felt like my first breath of fresh air after a long stay in a stuffy room. The morning after my birthday was surprisingly clear for June at this time of year. The sun shone through the thin curtains, casting golden patterns on the floor of the annex. I woke up early with a clear understanding of what had happened the day before and a firm intention not to back down from my decision. Over a cup of morning tea, I mentally drew up a plan of action. The first thing I needed to do was consult with a lawyer. Then I needed to find a good real estate agent who could help me sell the house quickly and profitably, and perhaps start looking for a new place to live. A small apartment somewhere in downtown Juneau, close to the library and museum where I could walk. The sound of a car pulling up snapped me out of my reverie. Looking out the window, I saw Bradley getting out of his old Subaru. He looked sleep-deprived and anxious. Heather and he had probably spent a sleepless night discussing the situation. The knock on the door was quiet, almost timid, not like Bradley at all. Good morning, Mom, he said when I opened the door. Can I come in? We need to talk. I silently stepped aside, letting him into the annex. Bradley walked inside and stopped uncertainly in the middle of the living room, as if he didn't know where to go. Tea? I offered, returning to my half-finished cup. No, thank you. He shook his head. Mom, I came to apologize. For yesterday, for Heather, for everything. I sat down in an armchair and gestured for him to take a seat on the sofa opposite me. I'm listening. Bradley sank heavily onto the sofa. What Heather said yesterday, it was awful, unforgivable. I talked to her all night and she understands that she crossed the line. Really? I didn't hide my skepticism. And she came to apologize herself? She is very upset right now. Bradley ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that always betrayed his insecurity. But she really is sorry. She's just been having a tough time at work and she snapped. Bradley, I shook my head gently. We both know it's not about a tough time. Heather has never respected me. She has systematically tried to push me out of your life. And last night was just the culmination of years of buildup. I know you've had a difficult relationship, my son began cautiously. But can't you find some kind of compromise? Selling the house is such a radical step. What do you suggest? I asked. That I continue to live in this annex, listening to your wife call me old lady and mock my habits? That I continue to endure restrictions on my movement in my own home and on my own property? Of course not. Bradley looked genuinely upset. We could set some new rules. Heather would agree to them, I'm sure. Until the next time she has a rough patch at work, I shook my head. No, Bradley, my decision is final. I'm selling the house. My son looked at me with such helplessness that for a moment I felt a pang of regret. But then I remembered all the humiliation I had endured over the past few years, and my heart hardened again. Where will we go, Mom? He asked quietly. You know we're still not very stable financially. I gave you 3 years to get on your feet, I replied. 3 years of living in my house, rent-free with almost no utilities. If you couldn't save up enough to at least rent an apartment during that time, well, that's not my problem. The words sounded harsh, but I could no longer allow myself to be manipulated, even if it was by my own son. You have a month, I added. I'm starting the sale process today. Bradley stood up, his shoulders slumped. Are you really willing to destroy our family over one argument? It's not one argument, Bradley, I said, standing up too. It's years of neglect and disrespect. And to be honest, our family was destroyed the moment you allowed your wife to systematically humiliate your mother. He stood there looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. Perhaps only now did he see not the usual soft, yielding mother, but a woman with her own dignity and character. I'll talk to Heather again, he said finally. Maybe we can find some kind of solution. Do what you think is best. I shrugged. But don't expect me to change my mind. After Bradley left, I called Martha. She listened to my story about the morning visit and sighed heavily. He's trying to sit on two chairs, Ellie. He wants to be a good son without quarreling with his wife. But sometimes you have to choose. I'm not asking him to choose between me and Heather, I objected. I just don't want to be part of this unhealthy dynamic anymore. And you're right. Martha always knew how to cheer me up. Listen, I have a lawyer friend who specializes in real estate. Would you like me to set up a meeting? I'd really appreciate it, I smiled, even though Martha couldn't see it over the phone. The lawyer's name was Vincent Pierce, and he agreed to see me that same day. His office was located in an old building on Main Street, right in the center of Juneau. When I entered, I was greeted by a short man in his 50s with graying dark hair and attentive eyes behind his glasses. Mrs. Kingsley, nice to meet you, he said, shaking my hand. Martha has told me a lot about you. I hope it was all good, I smiled. Exclusively, Vincent assured me, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. So I understand you want to sell your house? I briefly described my situation, trying to stick to the facts and not get emotional. Vincent listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. First of all, we need to make sure that everything is in order from a legal standpoint, he said when I finished. You mentioned that the house was registered in your husband's name? Yes, Noel bought it before we were married, but after his death, everything was transferred to me in his will. Do you have a copy of the will? There's a certified copy in a safe deposit box at the bank, and another one at home, in my papers. Excellent, Vincent nodded. That's important, especially in light of your daughter-in-law's allegations. We'll also need to provide documents confirming that you've paid property taxes in recent years. I've kept all the receipts, I confirmed. I've always been meticulous about such things. Excellent, the lawyer smiled. In that case, there are no legal obstacles to the sale. Now for the practical part. Do you already have a real estate agent? No, I was hoping you could recommend someone. Of course. Vincent took a business card out of his desk drawer. Olivia Croft, one of the best in Juneau. She specializes in homes in your neighborhood. I can call her right now if you don't mind. I nodded, and soon the lawyer was talking to the realtor, briefly describing my situation. After a short conversation, he hung up and smiled. Olivia can meet with you tomorrow morning to look at the house and discuss the details. She asked me to tell you that it's a very good market for sellers right now, especially in your neighborhood. I felt a surge of optimism. Everything was going more smoothly than I had expected. What about my son and his wife? I asked. Can they prevent the sale in any way? Legally, no, Vincent replied confidently. The house belongs to you, and only you have the right to dispose of it. But in practice, they can create difficulties when showing the house to potential buyers, for example, or deliberately keep it messy. We can take some measures to minimize these risks. What kind of measures? For example, we can draw up an official notice requiring them to vacate the premises by a certain date. This will give them a clear deadline and an understanding of the seriousness of the situation. We can also agree on fixed hours for showing the house so that your relatives know when they should be out of the house, or at least keep it tidy. I nodded, thinking about his words. Okay, let's draw up such a notice. And also, I would like to find a new place to live, a small apartment in the city center. Olivia can help with that too, Vincent assured me. She not only works with sales, but also with property searches. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt lighthearted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life, that my decisions had weight and consequences. It was an intoxicating feeling. On the way home, I stopped by the bank to retrieve a copy of Noel's will from the safe deposit box. The document was in perfect order, notarized with seals and signatures. There could be no doubt about its legality. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed Heather's car in the driveway. A wave of anxiety washed over me. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but there was nowhere to retreat. This was still my home, and I wasn't going to avoid it. The annex was quiet. I took a deep breath and headed for the main building. The door was unlocked, and I entered without knocking, a small act of defiance that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Heather was sitting at the glass table in the kitchen, immersed in her laptop. Hearing my footsteps, she looked up. Her face was pale with dark circles under her eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. "Eleanor," she tried to smile, but it came out unconvincing. "I was just about to come see you." "Oh, really?" I stopped in the doorway, not wanting to go any further. "Why?" "To apologize." Heather closed her laptop and sat up straight. "What I said yesterday, it was unforgivable. I was upset, tired, and had too much to drink, but that's no excuse." I looked at her, trying to gauge how sincere her words were. Heather always knew how to play the part when it suited her. "I appreciate your apology," I finally said, "but it doesn't change anything. My decision to sell the house stands." Heather's face changed, the mask of remorse instantly falling away, replaced by irritation. "Eleanor, you can't be so petty." I said some harsh words in a moment of anger. "That's no reason to ruin your son's life." "I'm not ruining anyone's life," I replied calmly. "I'm just ceasing to support a situation that has become unbearable for me." "Bradley said you've already been to a lawyer." Heather decided to change tactics. "Is this really necessary? We could work this out as a family." "Yes, I've been to a lawyer, and tomorrow I'm meeting with a real estate agent. The house will be put up for sale soon." "Where are we going to go?" Heather's voice sounded panicked for the first time. "You know we don't have the money to buy a new house or even rent a decent apartment. You've had a month to find a new place." I shrugged. "Use it wisely." "Are you really willing to throw us out on the street?" Heather stood up, her eyes narrowing. "My own son?" "I'm not throwing anyone out on the street. I'm giving you a month to find a new place to live. That's more than many tenants get when their lease is terminated." "Tenants?" Heather almost choked with indignation. "We're not tenants. We're a family." "A family that doesn't pay a cent to live in my house," I pointed out. "And yet you think you can dictate terms to me and treat me like an unwelcome guest." "No, Heather, that's not going to happen anymore." I turned to leave, but her next words stopped me. "Bradley won't forgive you for this." Heather's voice sounded threatening. "If you sell the house, you'll lose your son. He'll never want to see you again." I turned slowly. "Did you tell him that?" "He told me himself." Heather crossed her arms over her chest. "He thinks you're betraying him, that you're choosing money over your own child." "Interesting," I shook my head, "because he was here this morning and didn't mention any such feelings. On the contrary, he was trying to find a compromise." Heather hesitated for a moment. "He didn't want to upset you, but he's deeply hurt." "You know, Heather," I allowed myself a slight smile, "if you're going to lie, do it better. Don't repeat the mistakes you made with the will." "What do you mean?" She frowned. "I picked up a copy of Noel's will from the bank today. Fully executed, certified, legally flawless. So your little scam with the missing will has failed." Heather's face flushed. "I just repeated what I was told at the archives." "Of course," I nodded with feigned understanding. "And apparently, you were told that the house belongs to Bradley, even though I've been paying the taxes on it all these years, and my name is on the title. An astonishing mistake for a lawyer, don't you think?" Heather had no answer. She stood there clenching her fists, and if looks could kill, I would already be dead. "Anyway," I continued, "I came to pick up some documents from my old office, if you'll excuse me." Without waiting for an answer, I walked past her into the hallway. Noel's old office, which I had used after his death, had now been converted into a guest room. But my old secretary desk was still standing by the window, although it was covered with some ridiculous cover to match the new wallpaper. I opened the top drawer and took out a folder with the house documents. Everything was there: the title deed, insurance, tax receipts. I took the folder and returned to the kitchen. Heather was sitting at the table, buried in her phone. She looked up when I entered. "So you've really decided to go through with this," she said bitterly. "Despite the apology, despite the fact that it will destroy your relationship with your son." "My relationship with my son is already destroyed, Heather." I paused in the doorway. "And not by me. By the person who systematically tried to push me out of his life, who used my kindness and patience against me, who thought it was okay to humiliate me in my own home." I paused, watching her expression change. "But you know what? I'm grateful to you. Because without your outburst yesterday, I might have continued to endure this situation for years to come. And now I'm free. And that's the best gift I could have received on my 70th birthday." With that, I left the house, feeling a strange sense of relief. When I got back to the annex, I immediately called Martha. "How did it go with the lawyer?" she asked instead of saying hello. "Great, I'm meeting with the realtor tomorrow," I paused. "And I had a very interesting conversation with Heather." "Oh my God, did she make a scene again?" "No, this time she tried to apologize, and when she realized that wasn't working, she started manipulating me. She said Bradley would never forgive me for selling the house, that I was choosing money over my son." Martha snorted. "Typical. She can't accept the fact that she's lost control of the situation." "You know, Martha," I sat down in a chair, looking out the window at the bay. "I always thought that preserving family ties was the most important thing, that you had to be patient, forgive, turn a blind eye to the shortcomings of your loved ones. But now I realize that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is to break off toxic relationships, even if they are with your closest family." "I've been trying to tell you this for years," Martha said with a smile in her voice. "But you've always been too kind, too forgiving." "Not anymore," I smiled back. "Now I'm going to live by my own rules. And you know what? It feels right." "Ellie, I'm so proud of you," Martha said sincerely. "Few people our age find the strength to start over. I guess I just didn't have a choice. Sometimes life pushes us toward decisions we've been putting off for too long." After talking to Martha, I took out an old photo album. On the first page was a photo taken on our wedding day with Noel. I was young and radiant in a simple white dress, and Noel was tall and handsome, looking at me with such love that even after 50 years it made my heart beat faster. "What would you do in my place, dear?" I whispered, tracing the outline of his face in the photo with my finger. And even though Noel had been gone for 6 years, I knew the answer. He would have told me to trust my heart. And my heart was telling me that it was time to move on. Time to respect myself enough not to let anyone, not even my own son, treat me with contempt. I closed the album, feeling a surprising clarity and calm. For the first time in many years, I was absolutely sure that my decision was the right one. Olivia Croft turned out to be an energetic middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and decisive manner. She arrived the next morning right on time, dressed in a strict business suit and carrying a tablet. "Mrs. Kingsley, it's very nice to meet you," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Vincent has briefly told me about your situation. Don't worry, we'll find a buyer for your house quickly." I showed her around the annex, and then we headed to the main building. Fortunately, neither Bradley nor Heather were home. They had both left for work before the realtor arrived. "What a beautiful house," Olivia said admiringly as she looked around the living room with its high ceilings and large windows overlooking the bay. "And the view is stunning. Waterfront property in Juneau is always highly valued." We walked through the entire house. 3 bedrooms on the second floor, a spacious kitchen, dining room, study, and 2 bathrooms. Olivia took notes, occasionally photographing particularly good angles, and asked questions about the heating and water systems. "The house is in excellent condition," she concluded when we finished the tour. "Of course, the new owners may want to update some elements, but overall, it's very respectable." We returned to the annex to discuss the details. "So, based on current market prices, considering the location and condition of the house, I would recommend listing it for $350,000, Olivia said, looking over her notes. "That will give us room to negotiate, but it won't scare off potential buyers." The amount sounded impressive. When Noel and I bought this house more than 40 years ago, it cost only a fraction of that amount. Sounds reasonable, I agreed. How soon can we start showing it? I'll have all the documents and photos ready in a couple of days. By the weekend, we'll be able to post the listing on all the major platforms, and we can schedule the first showings for next week. Olivia paused. Vincent mentioned difficulties with the current tenants. Do you think they will cause problems during the showings? I sighed. I hope not, but I can't guarantee it. My son will most likely behave reasonably, but his wife— I understand, Olivia nodded. In cases like this, I usually recommend scheduling showings for times when the tenants are away. It would also be good to have a clear legal notice about the need to vacate the premises. Vincent is working on that, I confirmed. They will receive official notice in the next few days. Excellent. Then we're on the right track. Olivia smiled and stood up. I'll contact you within 2 days to finalize all the details. After the realtor left, I called Martha to tell her about the meeting. 350,000, she exclaimed. Ellie, you're rich! It's just a starting price for negotiations. I tried to dampen her enthusiasm. And we don't know yet how quickly a buyer will be found. In your neighborhood with a view of the bay? I'm sure the house will sell in a matter of weeks. What are you planning to do with the money? Buy a small apartment in the center and invest the rest, I guess. Olivia promised to help with the purchase of new property. What about Bradley? Are you planning to help him in any way? I thought about it. Despite everything that had happened, Bradley was still my son, and I knew that he and Heather were really struggling financially. I don't know, Martha. I haven't decided yet. Don't rush into it, my friend advised. Let them realize the consequences of their actions first. That evening, Bradley came home earlier than usual. I heard his car pull up to the house, and a few minutes later there was a knock on the door of the annex. Mom, can I come in? He looked tired and tense. Of course. I stepped aside to let him in. Bradley walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. He was silent for a while, gathering his thoughts. Heather said a real estate agent was here today, he finally said. Yes, Olivia Croft. She's very competent. So, you've really decided to sell the house? It wasn't a question, more of a statement of fact. I just nodded. What about us? Bradley looked up at me. What will happen to us? You'll receive official notification in the next few days. You'll have a month to find new accommodation. A month. He shook his head. You know how hard it is to find affordable housing in Juneau. I know, I agreed. But you have an advantage. You can look not only in Juneau, but also in the suburbs. Prices are lower there. Are you suggesting we move to the suburbs? Bradley's voice sounded incredulous. Heather works downtown. And so does my clinic. I'm not suggesting anything, Bradley, I said, sitting down across from him. I'm just stating a fact. You'll have to find a new place to live. How and where is up to you. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that always betrayed his confusion. I talked to Heather, he said after a pause. She's ready to apologize. Truly, sincerely. We could start over. Set new rules for living together. Bradley, I shook my head. It's not about apologies, and it's not about rules. The point is, I don't want to live in a situation where I'm not respected, where I feel like I don't belong in my own home. But we can change that. His voice sounded desperate. Heather realizes her mistakes. I'll make sure she doesn't cross the line again. Keep an eye on her? I couldn't hide my bitter smile. You're going to control your wife so she doesn't hurt your mother? Is that normal? Is that what a family should look like? Bradley was silent, knowing I was right. Just give us one more chance, he finally said quietly. For all the years I was a good son, for Dad's sake. The mention of Noel stung me, but I knew Bradley was trying to manipulate my feelings, and I couldn't let that happen. For Dad's sake, I said slowly, I have to learn to respect myself. He always told me I deserved better, and now, finally, I believed him. The next few days were spent preparing to sell the house. Olivia took professional photos, prepared a description, and posted ads on all the major real estate platforms. Vincent drafted a formal notice for Bradley and Heather, which was delivered to them by courier. The document clearly stated that they had to vacate the house within 30 days of receiving the notice. Heather's reaction was immediate. That evening, She burst into the annex without knocking, waving papers. What is this, Eleanor? A formal notice? Are you evicting us through the courts? I calmly put down the book I was reading. This is standard procedure when selling a house with tenants, Heather. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal? She almost shouted. You're throwing us out on the street, and it's nothing personal? I'm not throwing you out on the street, I explained patiently. I'm giving you 30 days to find new housing. That's more than the law requires. Heather threw the papers on the table. You'll regret this, Eleanor. I'll file a counterclaim. I'll prove that we're entitled to a share of the value of the house, considering all the investments we've made over the years. What investments, Heather? I couldn't hide my skepticism. The kitchen renovation you did without my consent? Or maybe replacing the locks to prevent me from freely accessing my own home? We paid for utilities, she objected. Electricity, water, heating. We kept the house in good condition. All those expenses are normal living costs. I shook my head. Any tenant pays for utilities, but you, by the way, didn't pay rent. You lived in my house for free for 3 years. We weren't tenants, Heather stamped her foot. We were family, which didn't respect me, I finished calmly, and now faces the consequences of its actions. Heather took a deep breath, clearly trying to pull herself together. Listen, Eleanor, let's be reasonable. Are you really willing to destroy our family over one argument? Think about Bradley. He's your only son. I am thinking about Bradley, I replied, and yourself too. We all deserve healthy, respectful relationships. What has been happening in this house over the last few years has not been healthy for any of us. But we can fix it, Heather insisted. Give us another chance. I shook my head wearily. 3 years, Heather. You've had 3 years to treat me with respect. And what have you done in that time? You've made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own home. You've ridiculed me in front of others. You've lied to my face. No, I don't believe you're suddenly going to change. Heather stood silently, her face pale with anger. You'll regret this, she finally said, heading for the door. I'll do everything I can to make sure this house is never sold. After Heather left, I immediately called Vincent to tell him about her threats. Don't worry, Mrs. Kingsley, the lawyer reassured me. She has no legal grounds for a counterclaim. As for sabotaging the sale, there are certain measures we can take to protect your interests. Vincent suggested several options, including a temporary restraining order prohibiting Bradley and Heather from interfering with showings or deliberately creating a mess. He also advised coordinating with Olivia to schedule showings for times when Heather was typically not home. And one more thing, he added before ending the conversation, it would be a good idea to start looking for a new apartment for yourself. The sooner you can move, the less conflict there will be. I agreed with his advice and contacted Olivia the next day to discuss finding a new place. I have some great options in downtown Juneau, she said. Small but cozy apartments with good amenities nearby. Would you like to schedule viewings for tomorrow? And so, a day later, I was already looking at potential new homes. The first 2 apartments didn't impress me. They were too small, with poor lighting and outdated finishes. But the third option made my heart beat faster. It was a bright apartment on the 4th floor of an old building in the heart of the city. Large windows overlooked the town square, and the small balcony offered a view of the bay. The layout was well thought out. A spacious living room connected to the kitchen, a bedroom, a study, and a bathroom. The ceilings were high, and the wooden floors added to the coziness. This building was constructed in the 1930s, Olivia told us as we looked around the apartment. It's one of the few historic buildings in downtown Juneau that's still in good condition. It was recently renovated, all the utilities were replaced, and the foundation was reinforced. But they preserved its historic appearance. I liked literally everything, the location, the layout, the atmosphere. I could imagine how I would arrange my furniture here, how I would drink my morning coffee on the balcony, how I would walk to the library and the museum. How much? I asked, already knowing that I wanted this apartment. $120,000, Olivia replied. Honestly, that's a very good price for this location and condition. I nodded, agreeing with her assessment. I'll take it. Are you sure? Don't you want to look at other options? No, this is exactly what I was looking for, I smiled. Let's get the paperwork done. Olivia looked pleased with my quick decision. Great. I'll contact the owner and prepare all the necessary paperwork. I think we can close the deal within a week. On my way home, I felt a strange lightness. The decision to buy a new apartment seemed to put the final touch on my decision to start a new life. It was no longer just an intention, but a concrete step into the future. A surprise awaited me at home. On the doorstep of the annex stood a large bouquet of bright wildflowers, my favorites. Attached to them was a note. I'm sorry, Heather. I took the bouquet and brought it into the house, not knowing what to think of this gesture. Was it sincere or another attempt at manipulation? In any case, the flowers were beautiful, and I decided to put them in a vase. In the evening, Bradley called. Mom, did you get the flowers? Yes, thank you. They're very beautiful. Heather wanted to apologize, he said hopefully. She really regrets her behavior. I appreciate the gesture, I replied cautiously. But as I said, it's not about the apology. My decision to sell the house stands. There was a pause. Mom, I don't know what to do. Bradley's voice sounded desperate. I feel like I have to choose between you and Heather, and I don't want to lose either of you. Bradley, I sighed, I'm not asking you to choose. I just want you to understand that I deserve respect. And I will no longer tolerate a situation where I am not respected, even if it means distancing myself from you. But we're family, he exclaimed. Yes, we are family, and that's exactly why I expected more from you. I expected you to defend your mother when she was being attacked and humiliated, but you chose to remain neutral, and now you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice. Bradley was silent for a long time. I heard you found an apartment, he finally said. Yes, in the city center. It's a wonderful place. When are you planning to move? As soon as the paperwork is finalized, probably next week. So soon? His voice sounded surprised. What about the house? It hasn't been sold yet. I can oversee the sale from my new apartment, I explained. Olivia will take care of everything. I see. He paused. Heather and I are also looking for a place to live. So far, without success. Everything we can afford is far from the center. I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to say. Mom, Bradley hesitated. If the house sells, do you plan to help us? Financially, I mean. There it was. The question I had been expecting, but still wasn't ready for. I haven't decided yet, Bradley, I replied honestly. I need to think about it. Of course, I understand, he said quickly. It would be a big help. After our conversation, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the setting sun paint the bay in shades of scarlet. Were Bradley and Heather so sure that I would help them financially that they didn't even seriously consider looking for affordable housing? Or was this another attempt at manipulation? The following week, showings of the house to potential buyers began. Olivia arranged them during the daytime when neither Bradley nor Heather were usually home. I also tried to be absent during the showings to avoid awkward situations. Interest in the house turned out to be enormous. The first showings attracted several interested buyers. Just 10 days after the showings began, Olivia called me with the good news. We have an offer, Mrs. Kingsley! $340,000, almost the full asking price. The Rodriguez family, very nice people. They have 2 children and like the location of the house near the school. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Joy at the quick and successful sale. A slight sadness at parting with the house where I had spent most of my life. And anxiety about the upcoming conversation with Bradley and Heather. That's a great offer, I agreed. Let's take it. Great. I'll get all the paperwork ready. I think we can close the deal within 2 weeks. That same day, I decided to break the news to Bradley and Heather in person. I headed to the main house, feeling strangely excited. I knocked on the door and, without waiting for a response, entered. Heather was sitting at the kitchen table, looking through some documents. When she saw me, she looked up, surprise written all over her face. Eleanor, is something wrong? The house is sold, I said simply. The deal will be closed in 2 weeks. You have that time to find a new place to live. Moving day turned out to be surprisingly sunny for June at this time of year. I stood at the window of the annex, watching as 2 strong men from the moving company loaded boxes of my belongings into the van. Over the past few weeks, I had carefully sorted through all my belongings, keeping only what really mattered. My favorite books, photographs, a few antiques, clothes, and personal items. I had either sold or donated everything else to charity. My new apartment in downtown Juneau was waiting for me. Bright, cozy, full of possibilities for a new life. The paperwork had been signed a week ago, and now I was officially the owner of a new home. At the same time, the formalities for selling the old house were being finalized. The Rodriguez family was to receive the keys in 3 days. Bradley and Heather had also found a new place, a small house on the outskirts of town quite far from the center, but at an affordable price. I didn't know this from them. They had practically stopped communicating with me after I told them about the sale of the house. The information came from Martha, whose friend lived next door to their new house. In the last few days before the move, I hardly saw Bradley and Heather. They had already moved most of their belongings, and the main house felt unusually empty and quiet. I only went there to make sure everything was in order before handing it over to the new owners. Mrs. Kingsley, we've loaded the last boxes. The voice of the moving company foreman brought me out of my reverie. Is there anything else we need to take? No, that's everything, I smiled. Thank you for your help. Then we're off to the new address. Shall we meet there in half an hour? I nodded, and when the van had driven away, made one last tour of the annex. The empty rooms, stripped of furniture and personal belongings, seemed strangely unfamiliar. It was hard to believe that I had lived here for 3 years. And even harder to believe that I had spent more than 30 years before that in the main house, which now belonged to another family. I went outside and headed for the main building. I wanted to walk through the rooms one last time to say goodbye to the house that had witnessed so many moments of my life, both happy and sad. Suddenly, the door opened and Bradley appeared on the threshold. He looked haggard and tired, with dark circles under his eyes. Mom, you're still here. Yes, I wanted to say goodbye to the house. I shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. You too? He nodded. I came to pick up the last of my things. We stood there silently, not knowing what to say to each other. It's strange how quickly people who are close can become almost strangers. Would you like to come in? Bradley finally asked. Maybe we could have some tea one last time. The offer was unexpected, but I agreed. We went into the kitchen, where there was no trace left of the former minimalist splendor created by Heather. Only a glass table and 2 chairs remained. Everything else had already been taken away. We only have tea bags, Bradley said, taking 2 cups out of a box. And I'm afraid there's no sugar. That's okay. I sat down at the table. I drink it without sugar. He put the kettle on and sat down opposite me. The silence was becoming uncomfortable. How's your new apartment? Bradley finally asked. It's wonderful. Bright, spacious, right in the center of town. I can walk to the library, the museum, the park, and there's a view of the bay from the balcony. Sounds wonderful. He smiled faintly. I'm glad you found a good place. How's your new house? I decided to keep the conversation going. Bradley shrugged. It's okay. Not what we're used to, of course. Smaller, further from the center needs some work, but it's all we can afford right now. I felt a pang of guilt, but immediately reminded myself that I was not responsible for the financial well-being of my adult son and his wife. The kettle whistled, and Bradley got up to make tea. When he returned to the table with 2 cups, his face was determined, as if he had finally gathered his courage for an important conversation. Mom, I want to know, he began, looking me straight in the eye. Why did you do it? Why couldn't you forgive Heather after she apologized? Why was it so important to you to sell the house we grew up in, the house Dad built? I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. Bradley, it's not about forgiveness. I forgave Heather for what she said on my birthday, but I can't forget 3 years of gradual, methodical humiliation. 3 years during which you stood by and watched as your wife systematically removed me from your life. That's not fair, he objected. I always tried to maintain a relationship with you. I came to visit. I called. Yes, you did, I agreed. Less and less often. And every time you looked at your watch, as if you were doing your duty. Do you remember how Heather lied to me that you weren't home on your birthday? You sat at the dinner table while I stood at the door with the cake I had baked for you. And what did you do then? Did you call? Did you apologize? No, you let it happen and didn't say a word. Bradley lowered his eyes, clearly unable to find a response. And the new kitchen? I continued. You threw away the stove I'd been cooking on for 30 years. You threw away the table your father made with his own hands, and you didn't even bother to warn me about it. Because my opinion didn't matter. I was just an old woman who was ready for the scrap heap, like all those obsolete things. Mom, it was Heather's decision, not mine. Bradley raised his hands in a defensive gesture. I didn't know it was so important to you. You didn't know? I shook my head. Or didn't want to know. Didn't want to come between your wife and your mother? So you preferred to just ignore how your wife was methodically pushing me out of your life? Bradley was silent, twirling a cup in his hands. I didn't sell the house out of revenge, my voice softened, and not out of greed. I sold it because I couldn't live in a place where I wasn't respected anymore, where I felt like I didn't belong, where every day brought a new little humiliation. But we could have fixed it! Bradley's voice sounded desperate. Heather was truly sorry. We could have started over. Bradley, some things can't be fixed. I shook my head. You can forgive. You can move on. But you can't pretend it never happened. I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore for the sake of maintaining the appearance of family harmony. And you chose money over family, he said bitterly. $340,000 over a relationship with your only son. No, I looked him straight in the eye. I chose self-respect over a toxic relationship. I chose a life where I am respected and valued over a life where I have to constantly humiliate myself to earn crumbs of attention from my own son. We fell silent again. A flock of seagulls flew past the window, their cries audible even through the closed windows. Heather says you're cruel and selfish, Bradley finally said. That you only think about yourself and not the good of the family. And what do you think, Bradley? I asked, looking him in the eyes. Not Heather, you. Do you think I'm cruel and selfish? He looked away. I think you could have found another way to solve this problem, a way that wouldn't destroy our family. Our family was destroyed long before I decided to sell the house, I said quietly. It was destroyed when you allowed your wife to treat your mother without basic respect, when you chose the path of least resistance instead of standing up for what was right. Bradley stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. Always, isn't it? I'm always to blame, never good enough, not a caring enough son, not enough like my father. No matter what I do, it's never enough for you. His words caught me off guard. Had he really felt that way all these years? Bradley, I never... Don't, Mom. He raised his hand, stopping me. I know I disappointed you. I know I'm not as perfect as Dad, not as successful, not as decisive, but I tried. I really tried to be a good son. I know, my voice trembled. And you were a good son. For many years, you were everything I could have dreamed of. But something has changed, Bradley. You've changed. And so has our relationship. Yes, I've grown up. He looked at me defiantly. I have my own life now, my own priorities, and you couldn't accept that. I accepted that you have your own life, I replied. I couldn't accept that there was no place for me in that life. Or, more accurately, there was only a place for a quiet, submissive old woman who has no say and should be grateful for the crumbs of attention she receives. Bradley shook his head. You're dramatizing everything, Mom. No one wanted you to be a quiet, submissive old woman. We just wanted to live our lives by our own rules, in our own house, which wasn't yours, I gently reminded him, and never was. It was my house, Bradley, mine and your father's. I let you live there because you needed help, and I expected not gratitude, but simple human respect. Respect, he smiled bitterly. You know what's ironic? Heather always said you didn't respect her, that you looked down on her, thought she wasn't good enough for your son. I thought about it. Maybe there was some truth in what Heather said. Maybe I did sometimes look at her with a certain degree of criticism. But did that justify her behavior? If so, I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I never wanted Heather to feel unloved or unaccepted, but that doesn't excuse the way she expressed her dissatisfaction. Bradley sighed heavily and sat back down at the table. What happens now, Mom? Are we just going to stop talking to each other? I hope not. I reached across the table but didn't touch him. I'm still your mother, and I will always love you. But our relationship can't be the same as it was before. Too much has happened. Too many words have been spoken. And too much money has been made from the sale of the house, he added bitterly. Bradley, I shook my head. If you think it's about money, then you don't know me at all. Then what is it? He looked up at me wearily. Explain it to me because I really don't understand. It's about self-respect, I replied simply. It's about not being afraid to start over at 73 if it means living with dignity. It's about not letting anyone, even the people closest to you, treat you like a burden, like something outdated and unnecessary. And for the sake of that self-respect, you're willing to lose your only son? And you were willing to lose your mother for the sake of peace in the house, I countered. When every day I allowed my wife to take small steps to remove me from your life. Bradley had no answer. We fell silent again, finishing our cold tea. I have to go, he finally said, getting up. Heather is waiting for me at home. There's still a lot to unpack. Of course, I said, getting up too. I have to go to my new apartment too. The movers are probably waiting. We left the house together, stopping on the porch where, many years ago, I used to sit with little Bradley on my lap, telling him bedtime stories. What about the money? He asked suddenly, without looking at me. Have you decided if you're going to help us? There it was. The question I knew would come sooner or later. I had thought about it a lot over the last few days, weighing the pros and cons. I'll open an account in your name, I said. $50,000. You can use it however you see fit. For a down payment on a house, for repairs, for the clinic. It's not a loan, it's a gift. From a mother to her son. Bradley looked surprised. Thank you, Mom. That's very generous. I'm not doing this out of guilt or to buy your forgiveness, I clarified. I'm doing this because you're my son, and I want you to have everything you need to live a happy life. Even if that life is without me. He nodded, and I saw a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment in his eyes. I'll call you when we're settled in, he said. Maybe you'll want to come see our new house. We both knew that was unlikely to happen. Too much had been said, too much had changed, but a polite offer was better than an open rift. Of course, I smiled. I'll wait for your call. We hugged awkwardly goodbye, and Bradley headed for his car. I watched him drive away and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Part of me mourned the loss of closeness with my only son, but another part, stronger, wiser, understood that this sacrifice was necessary for my own well-being. I walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to each room, each corner that held memories of a life lived. This was where Noel kissed me for the first time after returning from a long business trip. This was where little Bradley took his first steps. This was where we celebrated his acceptance into college, where I cried after Noel's funeral. But a house is just walls. Real memories live in the heart, and no one can take them away. Stepping outside, I turned around one last time to look at the house that was no longer mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt gratitude instead of bitterness. Gratitude for everything this house had given me, for all the happy moments I had experienced here, and even for the painful lessons of recent years, which had taught me to value myself. The new apartment greeted me with sunlight streaming through the large windows. The movers had already unloaded all the boxes and were about to leave. Everything's in place, Mrs. Kingsley, the foreman said. Do you need help unpacking? No, thank you, I smiled. I can manage on my own. When they left, I stepped out onto the small balcony. Life was bustling below. People were rushing about their business. Customers were sitting in the cafe across the street enjoying their lunch, and children were playing in the nearby park. I was in the heart of the city, in the heart of life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. The phone rang. It was Martha. So how's the settling in going? She asked without preamble. Just getting started, I laughed. The boxes aren't even unpacked yet. Need help? Celeste and I can come over. That would be wonderful, I said, genuinely delighted. And bring a bottle of wine. We need to celebrate your new home. We're on our way, Martha promised. And Ellie, I'm proud of you. Not everyone would have the strength to take such a step. After our conversation, I started unpacking the first box. the one with photos and mementos. At the top was an old family album. I opened it and saw a photo I especially loved. Noel, little Bradley, and me on the beach, all smiling, happy, with sand on our clothes and the sun in our eyes. I ran my fingers over the faces in the photo, feeling a slight sadness. Yes, I had paid a high price for my decision. My relationship with Bradley would probably never be the same again. Heather would probably do everything she could to push him further away from me. And I might never see my grandchildren if they ever came along. But strange as it may seem, I did not regret my choice. Because for the first time in many years, I felt whole, real. I was no longer pretending, adjusting, enduring humiliation for the sake of maintaining the appearance of family well-being. I was true to myself, my values, my dignity, and that feeling was worth any sacrifice. I put the photo on the shelf and returned to the balcony, looking out at the bay in the distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting the water in shades of golden pink. A new chapter in my life was just beginning, and despite the pain of parting with the past, I was ready to face the future with an open heart and my head held high. After all, at 73, I rediscovered the most important truth. It's never too late to start living by your own rules. It's never too late to learn to respect yourself and demand respect from others. It's never too late for a real, authentic life, even if it means leaving behind familiar comforts and security. And in this discovery was a freedom that I would not trade for any family ties if they stifle the spirit and humiliate dignity. I was ready for new acquaintances, new activities, new discoveries. Ready to create my own circle of friends, people who appreciate me for who I am, rather than trying to squeeze me into their convenient ideas about an elderly woman. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Martha and Celeste were standing on the doorstep with a bottle of wine, flowers, and big smiles. "Welcome to your new life," Martha proclaimed, hugging me, and I was ready to take on the challenge.